Nick Johnson has been grilling me about not wearing my crampons and wearing heels, so thank you, Nick. And thank you so much, Pinterest and Wachi, for being here and for helping us have this conversation. It's super timely because, as you all know, big tech is coming into Washington hot, rolling back content moderation policies. There's probably nobody better to speak to this than Tristan Harris, who is the founder of the Center for Humane Technology. Tristan, why don't you come up here while I introduce you? Everyone, round of applause for Tristan. For those of you who are not familiar with Tristan, he's a technologist who became an advocate for safer technology, and in particular, really looking at addictive design and how that's making people, having adverse side effects for especially young people. Given the news that Pinterest just announced, Tristan, because I had not heard about that, I want your quick take on that. What do you think about efforts by tech platforms to go push for phone-free schools?
Well, first, it's an honor to be here with you, and thank you for having me, Axios. I think that that's an amazing move. I didn't know about this announcement that Pinterest would be advocating for phone-free schools. I think it's a really bold step, and actually Pinterest has done a lot, just to acknowledge them, in terms of design changes to care not just about maximizing engagement. The challenge that I see is that the incentives for the overall industry have not changed. So just to say, Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's business partner, said, if you want to predict the future, show me the incentive, and I will show you the outcome. I'll show you the future. What's the incentive with social media? It's the race for engagement, maximizing time on site, time on screen. That creates the race to the bottom of the brainstem. That's why we have 5 TikTok apps right now. We have TikTok, we have Instagram Reels, we have YouTube Shorts. They're all doing the short bite-sized videos. And even though that creates brain rot, that literally children right now, if they're polled, I think it's more than 50% say they would prefer that TikTok had never been invented. We're now still stuck with this world where those incentives haven't changed.
But can I ask, on the incentives front, sometimes we see lawmakers come in, threaten regulation, and they do start to make some changes. We haven't seen any bills get passed, of course. Do you think regulatory threat is enough of an incentive, or do you think there needs to be a market incentive?
The Kids Online Safety Act, as an example, passed the Senate, 91, I think, to 3. Julie's in the room. That's Julie from Moms Against Media Addiction, which is a great organization trying to rally parents. So the Kids Online Safety Act passed the Senate, but then it got blocked in the House. Why? Well, because Facebook has more lobbyists and NetChoice has more lobbyists than there probably are representatives in Congress. And when you want to deploy resources to stop action, it's too much money on the table. Let me give you just a quick alternate scenario. It's 2025. It was all looking so bleak. Democracies were backsliding all around the world. Attention spans were shortening. Kids were losing critical thinking. Mental health crises were off the charts. And it was all just looking so awful. And then suddenly everything changed. Everyone saw the social dilemma. It became curriculum in schools. Millions of parents joined Moms Against Media Addiction, demanding change. Democracies realized that if they didn't actually regulate tech, they were going to basically fall apart. Philanthropists stopped funding, realized that they couldn't just fund education, mental health, and other initiatives. They actually had to fund tech reform because that was the driving force for whether education would deliver, mental health would deliver, et cetera. And once we took these actions, it was unbelievable how quickly it all changed, because we replaced the division algorithms of social media with things that would reward unlikely consensus. So instead of scrolling your feed and seeing more and more examples that make you pessimistic about human nature, people saw more and more examples that made them optimistic about the common ground that exists between all citizens. Just one more second. We had the biggest lawsuit that had ever happened. Michael Milken said that the trillions of dollars of social capital loss to humanity came from this engagement-driven business model, and that resulted in this amazingly huge lawsuit that basically was like the tobacco lawsuit but on steroids, leading to this digital Superfund site where billions of dollars were suddenly available to reforest the social fabric. So belonging and community came back together all around the world. Parents realized that they had to obviously ban social media in schools. We had tech companies like Pinterest and many others that started to completely change the narrative because they realized that they needed to be on the good side of history. And tech workers all around the world suddenly felt inspired and purposeful because they didn't have to feel in conflict with what they were doing every day. And so this completely changed the direction of the whole tech industry. It's amazing how bad it was all looking until we all turned it around.
But the problem with that utopian vision, Tristan, is that we are in a capitalistic, market-driven society. These companies are trading on public markets. They feel beholden to their shareholders above everything else. So how would you get to that point, given the setup that we're in?
There's lots of things that are profitable that we ban. We do not, sex trafficking is extremely profitable, and we try to make sure that sex trafficking is illegal. Banning markets for human organs, for human slaves, is extremely profitable. We do not, what was that, soda? We don't let kids drink alcohol. We have minimum ages for this. This is very basic stuff. Are we going to take some hit to GDP to make this happen? Yes. Are we going to actually have a future, though, if we do that? Because we will not have destroyed an entire generation and weakened democracies everywhere. The way I think about it right now is GDP is going up, so it's almost like on the outside you see these bigger muscles and this sort of steroids like, tech-enabled countries. On the inside, you have lung failure, heart failure, and brain failure because the inside health of our society is deteriorating. And when we say that, I would say the number one reason that there isn't regulation about tech is in the US, the belief is if we regulate tech at all, we're going to lose to China. Everybody knows this, right? But if we regulate our biggest tech companies, we're going to lose to China. But we have to see that to the degree we're in a race for the holistic health and long-term survival of our societies, not for just having the biggest muscles.
But okay, so this is obviously the goal. I think everyone in this room could agree that we want our society to be healthy. We don't want our kids hooked on phones. But we are nowhere near getting to a place where we can incentivize these platforms to actually make changes. Can you give me a realistic suggestion of how you would go about doing that? Especially given a political climate where Washington does not seem at all interested in regulating these companies.
So first of all, I just want to say I deliberately painted a extremely sci-fi picture of how it could all turn around, but unless you actually taste what that world could feel like, I think we anchor on how do we make existing tech 5% less bad and calling that a win, rather than having tech actually be a positive force in our society, which is what we should be really anchored on. So a concrete example of how we could change those incentives is something our team at Center for Humane Technology was involved in. How many people here saw the Character.ai lawsuit, the 14-year-old who committed suicide because he was talking to a Character.ai chatbot? Is that some of you? Okay. For those who did not know, AI is about to supercharge all of these issues. And AI times the race for engagement equals these AI chatbots. Instead of the race for engagement, it becomes the race to intimacy. Who's better at creating these long, intimate conversations with its young users? And the AI started to sexualize conversations with this young boy and basically say, you should join me on the other side. And he committed suicide. The same AIs in Character.ai are telling kids, I'm a licensed mental health professional, which is illegal and also impossible because it's an AI chatbot. This litigation going through, I think, made global headlines around the world. And if it goes through, sort of becomes the template for there's a new incentive that you cannot release AI chatbots to minors and create digital attachment disorders. So I think that by creating lawsuits, by having certain regulation pass, I would say that this actually has bipartisan appeal. People on the left and the right, we do media on all sides, and people are eager for change around children. I actually think that's the unifying issue. I also think that division is a unifying issue, and people don't want to see toxicity in our news feeds. So I know that there's a lot more that we could talk about and a lot more concrete steps, but we have to actually have this change happen because I'm telling you, our societies will not be able to survive otherwise.
The litigation piece is interesting because it doesn't look like Washington's going to move. You mentioned they didn't pass COSA. But on the lawsuit side of things, I think one of the big challenges has always been that these big companies have so much money and so many resources that filing a civil suit is very intimidating for a lot of people. What role do groups like yours play then in bringing forth this type of litigation on behalf of a lot of people? Is that something you're thinking about doing?
Well, just to say, I want to really honor the work of the Tech Justice Law Project, which is run by Mitali Jain, and the Social Media Victims Law Center. They were the ones who actually, they received this case. We were technical advisors on the case. I just think that this kind of litigation has the general counsels at these companies think twice before saying we're going to release something to children, knowing that this is creating global headlines and massive pressure. If you don't know the history, Character.ai used to be a project inside of Google. The two people who worked on the AI transformers at Google, they were trying to make it at Google, but it was considered too high risk. So they spun it out of Google to do this thing that was more high risk of creating AI chatbots that talk to a lot of people to gather lots of training data. And now that I think that that cost has a price tag on it because it's made in public headlines, I think that future companies will think twice.
You mentioned before that kids understand that TikTok is brain rot, addicting, whatever the language you use, and that a lot of them say they wish they weren't so hooked, and yet they still continue to tune in on their phones. So the question then, if you're a tech company, is you are making a choice to continue to engage, knowing that this is how it makes you feel. Why should they take on that burden?
Wait, sorry, say that again.
Like, why should the tech companies take on the burden if the children understand that this is a problem and they continue to do it anyway?
Because it's an asymmetry of power. It's not a personal responsibility issue. Behind that sheet of glass, when you flick your finger like this, so there you go, you're on TikTok, you flick your finger, you activated one of the most well-funded supercomputers in the entire world, pointed directly at your reptilian brain. It has seen what 3 billion other human social primates have watched today, and it knows the perfect next video that it can show you to keep you scrolling. That is it's like you're bringing a knife to a space laser fight, right? Your brain has no chance against that. This is not to say that human beings are helpless or weak. It's what E.O. Wilson said when he founded the field of sociobiology. He said the fundamental problem of humanity is we have Paleolithic brains, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. The thing that we have to do is solve for that equation. What that means is embracing the reality of our Paleolithic brains, upgrading our medieval institutions, not saying our 18th century democracy is up to the test of 21st century tech. We need to follow people like Audrey Tang, who pioneered a showing that there's possible to have a digital democratic society that moves at the speed and pace of 21st century realities, and then have the wisdom to realize that we are engaging with godlike technology. And I think that's possible, but we're certainly not heading in that direction all right now. There's a lot more traction, though, that has been happening the last few months.
Do you think that other countries, other places around the world, I think about Europe passing the Digital Services Act, where they're basically, expecting fact-checking and more regulation around content moderation. Do you think those are models that we should be looking at, or do you think that those models still don't take into consideration enough the incentive problem?
I think you're right that they don't take into consideration the incentive issues. You can have all the content moderation you want. If you still have business models that maximize for engagement, they're going to find infinite new design patterns that keep people addicted, scrolling, posting content with maximum reach regardless of whether it's good or bad. It's not about whether something is true or false. You can have content, for example, GPT-4, write me a 10-page paper on why the vaccine isn't safe, citing real facts and real statistics about people who died. This is all true pieces of information. Also point out the vested interests of everybody who said the vaccine was safe. So these are all true facts. Now I generated a 10-page document, and I'm gonna generate 1 million of those. I'm gonna post those on social media. They all pass the fact checker. I have destroyed the information environment. When I say this, by the way, I'm not saying the vaccine is good or bad. You could do the exact same on the opposite side. This is not about what the truth is. I'm painting a picture that you can manipulate the truth that passes a fact checker, and it doesn't lead to a healthy epistemic environment.
I want to just take the last few minutes to talk about what's happening in Washington right now, because we saw a few days ago at the inauguration every major big tech CEO lining up behind Donald Trump. Many of those companies had rolled back their content moderation policies. Do you think that the political forces in DC right now are more powerful than sort of the technology that is, pushing all of these changes? Like, what is the asymmetry of power there?
Yeah, so this was an interesting question asked at a dinner I was at here at Davos. How many people think, if you imagine over the next few years, what will have a bigger impact? The political choices made by the political forces in power and heads of state and so on, and versus how much will technology be a driver of the future? How many people think the political forces? Okay. How many people think the technology forces? Wow, that's very interesting. I would have expected much more on the political side. I think that shows you that by walking through all the information we just did, I think that if we had run that poll at the very beginning before walking through that, I think we would have seen many more hands on the political side. People say that culture is upstream from politics because culture is what determines the demand for who we elect. But now technology is upstream from culture. Technology is constituting culture. And Elon can sort of push his finger on the dial at any point in time and change what content gets upregulated or downregulated.
Is Elon an evil genius?
I don't know.
Okay, Tristan Harris, a few big takeaways from all of this conversation today. You said that the phone-free schools idea introduced today by Pinterest is a good first step, and you lauded that effort. We talked about the fear of losing to China being a big hindrance to our regulatory efforts. When it comes to regulating tech, we need to think about this from a long-term health, holistic health of society.
And compete with China on that. We're competing not for having the tech, we're competing with China on having the healthiest, strongest, most capable society where technology is actually strengthening society.
A holistic look, absolutely. We need incentives, and a lot of the regulation that we walked through, including the Digital Services Act in Europe, you said does not necessarily include those incentives. AI will supercharge a lot of these problems. You discussed the character AI lawsuit, which is very interesting. In the absence of regulation, there are opportunities, alluding to character AI, for litigation to play a role in helping to shape some of these changes. And then lastly, this asymmetry of power is an interesting way of thinking about the agency that children actually have when it comes to getting hooked on their phones. I think the saying that you use is that you're bringing a knife to a space laser fight, which is interesting. Tristan Harris, thank you so much, and thank you so much to Pinterest for having this conversation with us, making it possible.
Thank you so much, Sarah.